300 Empire.
Today.
An historic win for Alaska's Mary Peltola. You may remember she made history by becoming the first Alaska native to be elected to the Congress of the United States of America. She also made history as the first woman to represent Alaska in the U.S. House. Watch.
I am humbled and deeply honored to be the first Alaska native elected to this body, the first woman to hold Alaska's House seat. But to be clear, I'm here to represent all Alaskans.
Again, a major moment there. Peltola will serve out the rest of late Congressman Young's term that ends in January. Again, still will be up there for re-election come November. So let's welcome in Alaska Congresswoman Mary Peltola. Good to see you, Congresswoman. Thank you for taking the time. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you, Sean. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. I want to quickly touch on that. A moment in history. We watched it. The viewers just saw that. Take us back to that moment and fast forward it till today. I felt the glee in your voice. Is it still there?
It is still there. I'm very, very honored to be representing Alaska here in Washington, D.C. And no, the magic hasn't disappeared yet.
Well, you know, one of the things that you were hit with right off the bat to essentially test your leadership is that storm that impacted Alaska. And as you know, in many elections, leaders are judged on how they handle a disaster in that region. It was Western Alaska that was hit by one of the worst storms in half century, that Typhoon Merbok, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it hit the native tribal areas of the state, caused massive flooding. We've got video of it here, damage and power outages. How is the state in that area, in that region, faring now? I know that the president is working on disaster relief. He announced it for Puerto Rico. Your plans working with this administration for the folks that were impacted there in Alaska?
Well, yeah, the images really are very telling. And that storm, we are accustomed to south wind storms in the fall. That's nothing new. But to have an impact like this, to have those warm winds come in and bring all that water, and there was so much concern every time the tide was rising, and so much more relief when it would wane. We are very, very fortunate that we have not had any loss of life. We are thankful that all the folks who are there as first responders were able to help. People did a very good job trying to prepare themselves in their houses and their property. Like I said, there haven't been any loss of life, which is really a miracle considering the damage. In Hooper Bay, for example, their runway was completely submerged in water. They had power lines on fire. We're very concerned about, folks being able to communicate in and out. But there has been a lot of progress in making sure that communities are able to rebuild with good coordination between the state and the feds. One of the ongoing concerns I have is about food security. That was one of the things that I ran on. It really hits home to a lot of Alaskans, especially those of us living in remote parts of Alaska. And the concern I have is that all summer long, we work to gather food, harvest food to help us through the winter. And most of the people who live along this coastline have full freezers of fish and berries and things they've been harvesting. And now those things are all damaged, and we're worried about the winter ahead and the food security ahead.
You talk about worrying ahead and dealing with issues like that. You also have your own campaign to worry about as well, right? You won the special election. You beat out a well-funded Republican opponents there, a few of them in the special election for Alaska's House seat, including Trump-endorsed Sarah Palin. And it was a big talker there. What do you attribute that to? What was the big platform that seemingly pulled you over the top?
Well, I ran on a platform of really 4 planks, being pro-jobs, pro-family, pro-fish, and pro-choice. And I think that those 4 elements really appealed to a lot of different Alaskans, a broad swath of Alaskans. I think that it also helped that I really stayed on the issues and didn't get involved in any personal attacks of any of the opponents. I think it's revealing that the person who was most positive and talking about ideas and issues got the most votes, and the person who was most negative got the fewest votes.
Do you foresee November playing out the same way? Has campaigning changed at all for you?
Well, I've really had to put the campaign on a back burner, actually completely off the stove. I just have a very short window here in Washington, D.C. to be hard at work for Alaskans. And so I just believe in only really focusing on one thing at a time. That's kind of the best, the way that I work best is not trying to multitask on too many things. And honestly, just focusing on the official duties, there is so much multitasking that to really be in any way participating in the campaign during this time would be impossible. So I'm kind of pushing the campaign work off until the work here in DC is done, until the session has concluded. Yeah. But I feel like there has been so much momentum building in the special election, and I hope to capitalize on that in the regular election.
You talk about absolutely. You talk about being busy. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you want to establish an Office of Food Security in the Department of Veterans Affairs. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is my first piece of legislation. Congressman Young had 52 pieces of legislation, but it was important for me to really kind of walk the talk. And food security is a huge issue across our nation, and certainly Alaska is no exception. And our commitment to our veterans and service people, I think we could be doing a lot better in that department. So this was a really good fit, I think, for me in terms of being a first piece of legislation.
As you know, politics can get ugly, and you've not only watched it, but now you're in it. And as things heat up towards November, things can get a little rough moving forward as the days go on. I wanted to play a note, I wanted to play a sound clip rather, from The View this week, and maybe get your take on it. Reason being, because we began this segment with how you've made history going into Congress with who you are, what you stand for. But there was a moment on The View where former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley was criticized by using her name Nikki. Watch this moment.
I think that Nikki Haley was an incredibly effective governor of South Carolina. Wait, Alyssa, I have a question for you. Aside from Ron DeSantis, a lot of people don't go by their actual real name.
What is her name?
I believe it's, I don't want to mispronounce it. It's Indian, but her background's Indian.
Doesn't necessarily, I think if she leaned into...
A ton of people don't go by their color name.
Wait, a serious question.
Also worth noting, that's not Sonny's real name, and Nikki Haley. Nikki is part of her real name on her birth certificate. She obviously put out a statement on that. It kind of pulling back the sheets or the curtains rather of politics. What do you make of that as someone who's made an historic presence in Congress, but watching this talked about someone's name being used at birth?
Well, one of my names is Agathok. It's a Yupik name. It's very difficult to pronounce in English. So I'm happy to go by my Christian name of Mary. It's a simpler name. And I just think names are very personal, but they're also very important for communicating. They often say the sweetest sound is the sound of your own name. But, my husband's name is Gene. He's a junior, but he goes by Buzzy at home. And I just think whatever name a person chooses to go by is their decision.
Well, let's hope you don't end up on The View saying that here on national television.
Yeah, I challenge anybody to pronounce Agathok if you're not a Yupik person.
Absolutely. I appreciate the very candid, honest conversation that you had here today. Congresswoman Mary Peltola, representing the state of Alaska. Best to you. Thank you for that. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean.
No crooked establishment. None of that twisting the truth. No talking down to me.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
I trust Newsmax. Newsmax.
They don't tell me how to think.
They let
me decide.
Newsmax.
Real news
for real people.